Hi there, and welcome to today's Lightning Talks. I'm Rose Savel, and I work on community and education here at Solo.io, and I'm excited to welcome our first Lightning Talk speaker for the day. So please help me extend a warm welcome to Javon Dockery, who will be sharing information about Istio Lifecycle Management and Glue Mesh. Over to you, Javon.
Thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. As Rose mentioned, my name is Javon Dockery. I'm a software engineer here at Solo.io. I'm on the Glue Mesh team. And today I'll be talking about Istio Lifecycle Management using Glue Mesh specifically. Before I talk about, I'm planning on going into a demo. Before I do that, I just want to give an overview of what this feature is and the motivation behind why we built this. So the main motivation, as many of you have probably experienced, managing Istio installation and upgrades, it's pretty hard. And the folks over here at Solo really wanted to just simplify that process for our users. So one of the big things and one of the big focuses we had with creating this feature was trying to simplify the process for installing and upgrading Istio for people who are new to Istio. So there's a few complications with installing and upgrading Istio, including the fact that there's a few ways of doing it. There's a lot of different configuration options that you may have when you're installing Istio. And we really wanted to make that like introduction to Istio a lot easier for people new to Istio. But we also wanted to maintain the ability for people who are familiar with Istio to have as much flexibility in terms of how they're configuring their installation using Glue Mesh. So we're using a very familiar Istio installation API, the Istio operator, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But with those 2 points, the main thing that we really wanted to do is just abstract away a lot of the complicated details and processes around doing an installation and upgrade. So in the end, it will essentially just look like a user will provide a configuration for Glue Mesh. Glue Mesh will pretty much take that configuration and make sure it's installed in all your designated clusters, while also providing some of that flexibility, as I mentioned, to configure Istio in whatever way that you would like. This slide here is just showing an overview of like how this works. So users, all of you, would essentially create an Istio Lifecycle Manager custom resource, which is a Glue Mesh custom resource definition. And you'll pretty much create that so that the Glue Mesh management server within your management cluster can pick that up. What the Glue Mesh management server will essentially do once it has however many Istio Lifecycle Manager CRs you've created, it will determine what needs to be done in each of your workload clusters. So that can be an installation, that can be an upgrade. And then the Glue Mesh agent within all of your workload clusters will essentially take that installation specification and make sure that it's installed within that local cluster. So all the resources and making sure that all the configurations are set up as well. And that reconciliation loop will just continue to happen. So as you make changes to your custom resource, we'll continue to update your installation and trigger upgrades depending on what changes you'll do. And with that, I'm going to dive into a quick demo to show you how exactly this is working. So first, I want to show you, as I mentioned, we have our Glue Mesh management server. So in this case, this enterprise networking agent in my management cluster is our management server. As you can see, I also have a Glue Mesh enterprise agent. So that's the agent. I also have that deployed in my management cluster. And I have a second cluster that I'm also using here. So within this cluster specifically, I only have this enterprise agent. And what I'm going to do, I'll show you the configurations now, but essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell Glue Mesh, the management, I'm going to install this in my management server in the Glue Mesh namespace. And I'm essentially saying I want to install in my remote cluster to simplify this process. I'm only going to install Istio in my remote cluster, and I'm going to provide 2 separate types of installation. So one is going to be a control plane, which is just like a pretty slimmed down Istio operator spec, as you can see profile minimal. My Istio version that I'm targeting is 1.11.4. And then I'm also installing an ingress gateway here. I'm going to apply this in my cluster. And once you apply that in your cluster, we will make sure that we're updating. So we'll see once that's applied, we can see if this was actually accepted by GlueMesh. One neat thing about what we're doing here with managing, we can see the state is accepted, we see the tag and everything. But one neat thing that we're doing before we try to do the installation process is we're trying to validate some of the configuration that you pass in. So one nice thing that we can do now is folks here at Solo have learned a lot of best practices like separating your gateways from your control plane. So if we do see some of those things like you're installing your gateway alongside your control plane in the same Istio operator spec, this will not be accepted, we'll reject it, and we'll give you a message saying like, hey, you should break those out. We'll also validate your spec and make sure that we're injecting in any other configuration options needed for getting Istio working with GlueMesh specifically. Now that it takes a few minutes to install Istio, hopefully this has been enough time, but we can check in our Istio system namespace now in the remote cluster. We should see the ingress gateway in Istio-D, and we do see that. We see this was just installed. And you might notice that we are using revisions for this, and you'll see this become even more useful or more important as I get into the upgrades, but essentially we're using revisions when we are doing installation so that our upgrade process is a lot easier and smoother for users. But we can also verify once we have installed that we're actually using the exact image that we want. And so I'm just going to check this deployment specifically, and I can see I'm at my 1.11.4 target. Now, let's say I want to upgrade this, which is what I'm going to do now. I pretty much have the same exact spec. The only thing I've changed is I updated the tag. I want to go to 1.11.7. And what I would do, I'm doing this for both my control plane and my gateway. Once I apply this, what GlueMesh will then do, it will know based off of the changes that I made to this specific custom resource that I am triggering an upgrade. And then with this trigger of an upgrade, it will go and try to reconcile all those changes within the remote cluster. One thing to note is for our patch upgrade, so going from 1.11.4 to 1.11.7, we are essentially doing an in-place upgrade. We'll talk about canary upgrades in just a second, but that's something that can also be overridden if you don't want to do in-place upgrades for your patch upgrades or any of these small changes. But we can see, or we should see that this has been accepted by GlueMesh as well. If there weren't, we'll see failures there. Yep, that's accepted. And I feel like it should have been enough time for this to reconcile. So let's just double check the Istio-D deployment that we were just looking at to make sure that the image actually did update. Yep, we can see that we're now using 1.11.7. And this, as I mentioned, it upgraded that version in place. If I do want to, say if I'm doing a minor upgrade, so I'm going from 1.11 to Istio version 1.12, GlueMesh will be able to determine that based off of what change you made, as I mentioned, to this Istio operator. So I'm going from 1.11.7, now I want to go to 1.12 Istio. I'll apply this. And this will also take a bit of time because it's essentially what we're doing in this case. I'll just talk over it while I'm waiting for things to get up and running. But essentially what we're doing for Canary upgrade specifically is we're installing the same Istio installation alongside your existing Istio installation. So you should expect we'll have the Istio installation that we had already installed will be completely untouched. And then we'll have a separate Istio installation installed alongside using the same Istio Lifecycle C custom resource that we created. And the reason why we're doing a Canary upgrade in this case is because we want to make sure that users are able to, like, in between upgrades, are able to slowly roll out and test that the newer Istio Miner version has upgraded successfully and like it works with all of your workloads essentially. So after you do this, essentially what you'll do is you'll go in and you'll test and make sure that everything's working. Let me make sure that this was accepted actually. But yeah, so we're keeping track of the state of the Canary installation, and then we also have our active installation. So with this change, we did not make any changes to anything for our previous installation. We pretty much just created another installation right alongside your 111 installation for our 112. And we should be able to see this now. I think it should have been enough time. If we get all of our deployments, you can see we have our 111 Ingress Gateway and our 111 SCOD alongside of our 112 Ingress Gateway and SCOD. And as I mentioned with our installation process, we are making sure that pretty much as you make changes to your Istio Lifecycle Manager, we're determining what type of upgrade we need to do. But if you want, there's additional configuration options you can provide on your Istio Lifecycle Manager to force it to always use Canary upgrade if that's something you want to do. So you have that flexibility if you always want to be safe, even for the patch upgrades that you're doing within your cluster. And we'll assume that you've done all the testing and you've made sure that 112 works. What you can end up doing using GlueMesh is you should be able to pretty much uninstall the previous revision just by updating the same Istio Lifecycle Manager. And all you have to do is pretty much specify in this manager that I want to remove this 111 revision that we created. And then GlueMesh will go ahead and do the work of cleaning up all those resources for you. Getting a little close to time, so I'm going to switch over back to this presentation to just talk about what's coming in the future for this feature. So currently, as you saw, we can do an installation, we can do patch upgrades, minor version upgrades. Also, if you're changing configurations within your Istio operator spec, all those things will be cascaded and also handled by this upgrade process. Some of the configuration changes might trigger a Canary upgrade, some might just be in place. It really depends on what's changing, and GlueMesh is really determining all of that. But what's coming in the future, one big feature is having the ability to take over an existing Istio installation. So if you already have installed Istio on a cluster, you'll in the future be able to use GlueMesh to upgrade that version of Istio using the same configurations that you already have installed in your cluster. So say you use Istio Cuddle to install 111. In the future, you should be able to bump up to Istio 112 using GlueMesh, and all your configurations will try to discover all your configurations. We'll make sure that we're validating that all with you, of course, but GlueMesh will completely handle all of that for you. And then another big piece is, as you saw, I was specifying an Istio operator spec as I was installing and using inside of my Istio Lifecycle Manager. What we're hoping to also land sometime in the future is creation of Istio operator profiles that are pretty much built up by a lot of the solo expertise that we have. We've learned a lot of stuff around what configurations are good, configurations you should have in your production environments. And we're hoping to pretty much pull together different Istio operator profiles for gateways and control planes, for instance, and in other cases. So this spec that you're specifying will become even simpler because you'll just say, I want to install a control plane using solo IO production profile, and then that's all that you'll have to specify, essentially. That's the hope. So as I mentioned early on, we really just want to simplify this process for people, but also you'll still, even with those profiles, as you may know, you'll still be able to have that flexibility of configuring things more specifically outside of that scope. Yeah, that's all that I have today for this presentation. Thank you all for taking some time out and being here.
All right, thanks, Javon. That was really helpful.